supposed to have some cake later.
You can hang up, no longer listen to elevator music.
You need about another $800 million this year.
Troubled by the claim that there's that authority there when I don't believe that there is.
I'd like to just take a moment to talk about the investment in climate change.
Deadbeat millionaires and billionaires.
To change the threshold to $5,000, which it would seem to not have the authority to do so. The phrase that Ronald Reagan used, "We're from the government, we're just here to help."
I would change the President Reagan statement a little bit. Black taxpayers.
African-American taxpayers.
So how can somebody in a remote location be handling niche tax returns?
It's not very complicated to catch an earned income tax.
3,832 handguns, 600 shotguns, 439 rifles, 15 fully automatic weapons.
Here's the issue and why we're asking for money.
14 current cases with the IRS totaling over $1 million in stolen returns.
Before we began, I know I speak for everyone here when I wish our ranking member a belated happy birthday yesterday, and we're supposed to have some cake later, so you have to celebrate.
I don't want a roll call vote on that.
Okay, but late happy birthday. We appreciate serving with you, sir. Today's sole witness is the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, Daniel Werfel.
Commissioner, what's the IRS done to restore an element of fairness to the tax system, and are there any new compliance push that you are aware of to audit high-income earners and big corporations?
Yeah, thank you for the question. See, what happened in the period before the Inflation Reduction Act, when IRS funding was low and we weren't making the appropriate investments, is there's a variety of different areas we fell behind. And one of the key areas we fell behind is the ability to assess complex returns. So in situations where taxpayers had the means to hire an army of lawyers or an accountants to create a lot of complexity in their return and potentially shield income, we weren't making the appropriate investments to track that, assess it, and collect it. And now we are doing just that. With the Inflation Reduction Act resources, we are focused on building our capacity around how to deal with complex returns and how to make sure there's fairness.
And it does seem like, I want to give you a little credit, it seems like things have got a little bit better, but still, they're on the phone for over an hour, they're aggravated. Being someone that's in business, you want to take care of those folks as quickly as you can, at least in terms of answering the phone, get their questions answered. And you touched on it in your early testimony, but where's your sense of where we're going to get to a point where we can answer the phone quicker and try to get them a little bit more help from a quicker stance?
So we're on our main phone line, which is where most of the volume comes, we're at an 85% level of service, but there's more to do. There are other phone lines that we need to continue to work on and improve. And let me give you an important example of what we're doing. I don't ever want to hear about someone waiting on the phone for an hour. That is heartbreaking, frustrating, but it's also a rallying cry for us. One of the things we've done this year is we've instituted a callback option. And what that means is that the way we're engineering our call center now, if your wait time is going to be longer than 15 minutes, we will introduce into the phone, hey, we can schedule a callback option. So you can hang up, no longer listen to elevator music, and we'll call you back. These are the types of improvements. I know this happens in your everyday life when you're on any other call center in the retail industry and otherwise banking industry. We have some catching up to do. But because we have funding, we can make these investments, and these are really helpful to taxpayers because now, if they've got a baby crying or something, they can hang up and get a callback option.
And if I understand, to stay on this path, you've indicated that you need about another $800 million this year.
Yes, and that is an important point about our budget. And if I could just say it briefly, we have a base budget to fund our ongoing operations, keep the lights on, and then we have the Inflation Reduction Act, which is modernizing and helping us build capacities. Our base budget is insufficient to run the daily train schedules. And what that means is we have to borrow from the modernization fund just to keep the lights on. And if we keep doing that, we won't modernize. We'll keep the lights on, but we won't build these capacities that are so important to help taxpayers.
The 9 months authorized for that study have now lapsed, as I'm sure you're aware. Can you tell me explicitly what authority the IRS relied on to create an entirely new government-run system of filing taxes, since the law only provided authority to conduct a study on the direct e-file system. And I'm not looking for other examples of the IRS helping people file their taxes. I get that. I want specific language from the federal code authorizing the particular pilot.
Yeah, absolutely, Congressman. I appreciate the question. So we do have a responsibility and an authority to offer taxpayers different approaches for how to meet their tax obligation. I can give you the exact statutory site for that. What's critical about the direct file solution is that it is an option. There is no mandate for anyone to use this solution should they choose it.
But you're saying there's direct authority to do so?
There's direct authority to implement the tax system in a way that provides tools and solutions for taxpayers to meet their tax responsibility.
Generically speaking, but
yeah, well, paper,
electronic,
electronic, calling us on the telephone. Not everything is delineated precisely in law. So, for example, if we create a Adobe version of the tax form that you can fill in online, we've done that. There's not a specific legal authority to do that, but there is a legal description of the commissioner's responsibilities. And one of those responsibilities is to provide taxpayers with avenues for how they can meet their tax obligation. And this is just one avenue. It's not a mandate. It's an option.
Well, I understand that, which may not be a mandate, does not always mean there's the authority to do so. And I would argue that that is the case right now. I'm specifically troubled by the claim that there's that authority there when I don't believe that there is.
I'd like to just take a moment to talk about the investment in climate change in the IRA. This was the biggest investment in climate work in history in our country. How would you describe the rollout so far, and how would you characterize the uptake on tax credits like EV or solar credits?
Yeah, we've had a successful launch. In January, we launched our portal, our IT solution, that allows those that are eligible for credits related to the manufacturing and the transactions associated with electronic vehicles. And like any new solution, there are certain things that we could do to make it better and improve the customer experience. But overall, it's been robust participation, and the system has performed as expected.
What is the IRS doing to audit high net wealth individuals and tax cheats?
Congressman, it's where we're focused, and we're taking multiple different steps. First of all, we're hiring additional accountants, auditors, and where they're being deployed and where we're shifting our audit workforce is to make sure that we're focusing efforts on high wealth individuals, because that's where we think we have a growing problem of tax evasion, and we need to address it. We're deploying technology differently. We're using analytics and AI to better understand how money moves in these very complicated arrangements. You know, companies with subsidiaries and subsidiaries to those subsidiaries, money moving across international jurisdictions, understating their profits in the U.S., doing all of these things that are difficult to track, and we're investing in subject matter expertise, people, technology, analytics, all so that we can catch up.
And I want to talk a little bit about something that was raised earlier about the deadbeat millionaires and billionaires who are cheating on their taxes and evading their responsibility to pay their fair share. I would say that I don't think anybody loves paying their taxes, but I think people do it if they feel like the system is fair and everybody pays their fair share. What would happen if middle income and low income Americans didn't pay their taxes or cheated on their taxes at the same rate that these millionaires and billionaires did? What would happen?
Well, I mean, the deficit would grow. I mean, the IRS, and you're right, paying your taxes isn't your favorite activity of the year, for sure. But we fund virtually the entire government through those tax collections. And in order to have a functioning government, whether you want that government big or small, the IRS needs to function effectively, and there needs to be equity in our tax system. Otherwise, people will lose trust, and trust is what our tax system is built on.
The Democrat senators also bragged about the IRS decision to change the threshold to $5,000, which it would seem to not have the authority to do so. With all due respect, Mr. Werfel, and I know you're in a tough job, but this looks like you're blatantly not enforcing the law and are also unilaterally changing the law because Senate Democrats in the current administration are having second thoughts about just how terrible this policy is that's been enacted. So on the direct e-file program that you're doing, you're competing directly with those corporations.
I don't see it as a competition. I see it as another option for taxpayers.
So if you're saying that these services are provided by corporations free and others that are doing business, so we have it there. And so when you say it's free to the American people, you're saying you're providing these services internally, doesn't cost you anything, there's no taxpayer dollars used in your organization for administrative costs to do this?
No, there is a cost, and we've been public about what the potential and cost would be. The goal is to provide taxpayers with options and to help the taxpayers pick the solution for filing taxes that's best for them. Some will file in paper. We encourage them to file electronically. Some will hire an accountant. Some will go to the commercial software and pay. Some will go to the commercial software and try to work that for free. And what we heard from taxpayers, and we heard it pretty loudly, was that there was an interest in having an option where they could file directly with the IRS for free. And we wanted to test whether that option was viable.
Mr. Werfel, with all due respect, isn't that the sort of the old phrase that Ronald Reagan used, we're from the government, we're just here to help? I mean, it's not free. I mean, listen, we've given you billions of dollars. This is not free for you to provide this service to American people. When, I know it might be shocking, but from the data we've gotten from these commercial companies that you've described, somewhere 29 million tax returns been filed through the direct, for the free file program that they have out there. And so I just, or the direct e-file program rather, just want to make sure that, you know, again, everybody thinks if the government does it, it's free. It's not free if the government provides these services. It is costing taxpayer dollars to provide that.
Yeah, so here's how I would answer that. I would change the President Reagan statement a little bit. We're from the government, and here's an option. And if you don't want to use the option, you don't need to. And we're just piloting it this year, a small-scale pilot. So what's going to happen is we'll evaluate what was the cost, what was the experience, is there a demand for taxpayers? Do taxpayers want the IRS to provide this option?
Yeah, Mr. Werfel, all due respect, you know, I've only been up here 5.5 years, and this is the age-old thought, and this is long before you got into government and I got into government. Everybody wants to talk about the federal government having money that it really doesn't. It has taxpayer dollars that funds our government. I think we would agree with that. So we're using, I think it ought to be described, it's not free, it's funded by other taxpayers and them as well. If they're using the service, if they qualify, my guess is I don't know what the criteria is, but my guess is to qualify for that program is that they're probably not paying taxes and it's a refundable credit that they're getting in many cases. But I'm just saying it's not free. And we should say it's paid for by taxpayer dollars. And you know, this misnomer that we get government services for free is just not true. It's disingenuous. I yield back.
Ms. Sewell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner, for being here today so that we can talk about the very important relationship between taxpayers and the IRS. Tax seasons can be very stressful for millions of American families and small businesses, and I'm happy that we're taking important steps today to highlight tax filing experiences that have resulted in a more sensible, fair, and more efficient process. The road to this point has been a long one. The IRS has had their work cut out for them with a very long list of major implementation issues over the last decade. But today I'm glad to hear that the IRS, through the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, is improving its interactions with the public. Last year, in this very same setting, you and I were able to discuss the well-documented reports over the last few filing seasons that recipients of the Earned Income Tax Credit face significantly higher audit rates than other taxpayers. These findings were discussed in detail, and I appreciate our colloquy. EITC audits are more heavily concentrated in the southeast of the United States and including many of the counties that I represent in Alabama's rural and underserved Black Belt. In fact, Greene County, Alabama, in my district, was among the 10 most audited counties in the country for EITC recipients. And I venture to guess that the median income for a family of 4 in Greene County is less than $30,000 a year. Since our conversation last year, you penned a letter to Congress in September of 2023 mentioning the administration of additional steps and an initial round of changes that have been made regarding the audit process for EITC. I do believe accountability is a direct result of transparency, and with that, the opportunity to ask you whether or not this initial round of changes that you highlighted in the letter to Congress has resulted in less audits on underserved communities.
It will. I want to start by saying it is, there are certain solemn responsibilities that the IRS has that we have to meet our mission. We have to meet our mission in a way that avoids disparate impact. And in this case, there was evidence that our audits in earned income tax credit was having a disparate impact on Black taxpayers. And we have to first acknowledge it, and now we have to fix it. And one of the significant things that independent study reported was driving the disparity was the volume of EITC audits. So one of the key things we've announced is a significant and dramatic reduction in the number of EITC audits planned for this coming tax year as a way to address it. We also are testing changes in the audit selection algorithm that we have a hypothesis will remediate the disparate impact that has been occurring. And it'll take a little bit of time to validate that. We hope to update that, maybe in the fall, where we have more data to make sure that we're reporting publicly that the steps we took had the impact that we wanted it to have.
Well, I will definitely be awaiting such a report. I think it's really important that we don't target certain populations, especially those that are underserved populations, and for something as important but not often claimed like the Earned Income Tax Credit. So I look forward to working with you in any way I can to help address this issue. As you rightfully said, it is disproportionately affecting African American taxpayers.
It's troubling to me when you keep using those terms in the same sentence as if all high-income earners, who, by the way, are paying most of our taxes, are all looking to avoid taxes, because that's not my experience with business owners, with corporate leaders. They want to do what's right. And so, it concerns me going into an audit. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty, and if your entire organization is taking the approach that you're taking today, you're actually feeling that people are guilty before the audit is even done.
It was not my intention. My intention is to make sure we're increasing scrutiny on complex returns where there's high risk of evasion.
Do you have any information on what percentage of returns on high-income earners result in no change?
I can get that information for you. I don't have that at my fingertips.
Do you have?
But we know that there's a tremendous amount of fraud in the earned income tax credit space, child tax credit space. If you had to look at what you think the corporate fraud is versus the total dollar amount on the earned income tax credit and child tax credit, either through improper payments or fraud, how do those two numbers compare?
Well, I actually think they're both important. I don't have the side-by-side ledger in front of me.
Okay, all right. So, but they're both important.
Both material.
Well, the Luber's controller called the IRS help desk multiple times and couldn't get through. You said earlier you've hired 5,000 new call agents to help with that. And so this letter is just less than 2 weeks ago. And so have all IRS agencies, employees returned to the office for 5-day work weeks since COVID? I know the GAO issued a report this fall that high percentages of offices across all agencies, not just the IRS, had not returned to the office. And what are you going to do, or what are you doing to help make sure that taxpayers who are trying to do the right thing can get through to work with your agents and other employees?
Yeah, so first clarify, all IRS employees are working. The objective is to make sure that we're getting the mission done. And when you tell me that someone didn't get through on the phone line, I want to learn more about that and figure out what we need to do. There is a government-wide standard out there in terms of where we stand today, what should be the percentage of in-office work versus remote work. The IRS is generally consistent with that government-wide standard, but we're constantly evaluating any steps that we can take.
Sorry to interrupt, but what is that, before I run out of time, what is that governmental standard for the IRS for the number of employees?
Well, the government-wide standard is
working?
50% is the government-wide standard.
So 60% of the employees come to
everyone's
office.
working, it's 50% on-site versus 50% working in some remote location.
So how can somebody in a remote location be handling these tax returns? That just seems to me that it's not doing the job that needs to be done to help service American constituents.
Well, I'm happy to walk you through in greater detail, but we have many, many employees on site doing the exact work that you described. And, you know, in our campuses where a lot of our processing of taxes goes, that's where we have heavy presence of IRS employees.
In November of 2023, you announced plans for a threshold of $5,000 in 2024. Yes. Who specifically made that decision to set this new threshold?
That was a strong recommendation from the stakeholders we reached out to across a variety of stakeholders, taxpayers, these companies that are third-party payment platforms. The reason why there seemed to be consensus on $5,000 was because that, if you looked at the analysis and the model, $5,000 would ensure the most revenue would be impacted while also protecting the most taxpayers from unnecessary paperwork and sending them things that they didn't actually need.
Well, I have to reclaim my time because, I mean, what authority does the IRS have to set the new threshold? The authority.
So we have an authority under the code to administer laws consistent with taxpayer rights. And so this happens from time to time. Oh. Our goal and our objective is to implement the laws on day one.
Yes,
there are many.
We write the laws.
Yes,
Congress writes the laws.
But
don't.
There are a variety of examples throughout history where the IRS, in order to protect taxpayers from undue burden or from potentially being overtaxed, where we have either delayed implementation or ramped implementation. This is not the first time, and I'm not the first commissioner that has confronted this tension.
But they're still illegal. Your actions are still illegal.
It's not illegal to take a step to protect taxpayer rights.
Well, anyway, I'll move on from this.
Are you guessing that maybe the earned income tax credit fraud or whatever, and I'm sure you can recover all of it since it's not very complicated to catch an earned income tax problem. You don't even need a person. Probably the machine will find that. Am I right or wrong about that?
Well, Congresswoman, for me, it's about priorities.
Yeah.
And what are our priorities within earned income tax credit program integrity, and what are our priorities in terms of tax evasion amongst the wealthy? And that's what I'm seeking to establish.
Okay. Were you aware that the Biden administration has said that TikTok is not to be allowed on government devices?
I am aware of that, yes.
All right, so this is just very troubling to me. So the OMB issued guidance February 27, 2023, agencies were how to implement this law. DIGA found that 23 devices used by IRS still had access to TikTok, and this is still troubling. It took the IRS, this thing was issued, TIGTA issued this to the IRS in May. The IRS did not take action until August of 2023. Why?
I'm not sure of the facts of that, but that does seem unacceptable, and I will get to the bottom of it.
Do you know on an average day, Commissioner, how much of your headquarters building is being used?
In Washington, I don't have that number at my fingertips.
Would you say it's less than 50%?
It may be because, as I mentioned earlier, overall, the IRS is roughly in line with the government-wide standard of 50%. So because it's an average, it may be under.
But if we're talking about a day where the weather is fine, wouldn't it make more sense from a productivity standpoint to have employees physically present at the IRS than working remotely?
In some cases, yes. In other cases, it's less relevant.
You've been there a year.
Yes.
When did you, and I mean, this goes back to the returns were leaked in 2019. It was published in 2020. Then Mr. Littlejohn leaked a second batch in 2020 to ProPublica, which was
Yes.
published in 21. Obviously, you weren't there, so I'm not asking you to vie for what happened during that period of time, but you've been there a year. So is it your testimony today that since you've been there, this has obviously happened, you've started taking corrective actions on these audit?
Oversight review from TIGTA, we've said it's like we've handed in our assignment. We've put in all the audit trails to the systems that you've identified needed audit trails, and they're reviewing that to ensure that we didn't miss any.
So I want to make it clear to the American people today. So the 3 recommendations that were in the report last week that they made, you are stating under oath today that those have been made by the IRS. All of the recommendations in the report.
We've agreed with all the recommendations. I'm stating for the record that the audit trails recommendation has been done. I want to double, triple confirm that we're completed with the other recommendations, but they're all underway.
First, why did the IRS and Treasury feel it was necessary to create a direct file system when industry already provides many of these options for free to taxpayers? And secondly, could you explain how you concluded and how the IRS concluded that they were authorized to do this, to create, maintain, and update a direct file tax preparation platform?
Yeah. So we believe, a responsibility and an authority under the law to make the tax filing process easier and more beneficial for taxpayers. As an example, if you allow, I mentioned earlier, we provide a callback option now. If you call in, and that took some technology. It wasn't rocket science technology, but we had to implement technology. We didn't have to go to the code and determine was there specific language in the tax code that says, IRS Commissioner, you have the authority to offer a callback option in the call center. So there's a whole set of different things that we can do for taxpayers to give them more options. It's not a mandate. I think it's a much different bar if I were up here saying, I, as IRS Commissioner, am mandating something.
A New York Post article that talked about the number of firearms and munitions that you all have at the IRS and the number of armed agents. And it went through specific numbers: 3,832 handguns, 600 shotguns, 439 rifles, 15 fully automatic weapons. So it's very detailed. I don't know where they got their information. And I think an appropriate oversight role for us is to, as a check and balance, and for the purpose of transparency to the taxpayers and to the people that we report to in the People's House, that they ought to have some confirmation of whether or not those numbers are right or if they're different. You responded with a letter and said, the inventory of guns and ammunition is consistent with other law enforcement agencies. I find that an inadequate response. I think if the American people who we all work for ask as a check and as a point of accountability on agencies with tremendous power, and with tremendous power comes, I think, great responsibility and oversight and accountability, they deserve a specific answer. What's in the inventory? How many armed IRS agents? I'm not suggesting that there might not be some level of appropriateness, but just saying we keep up with the same standards of who? The FBI, the ATF, the Border Patrol? So I'm going to ask you again, do you have the specifics of firearms, the number of armed IRS agents, and the inventory of munitions? I think the American people ought to know that. And then we can discuss why you have it and why they exist and for what purpose. And again, there may be an appropriate need.
Yeah, I would love to answer this question. First of all, I do recall the letter. I believe the letter that we sent you had a link to a public report that has the information you requested. If it did not, then we will get you that public link. I added the point that it was consistent with other law enforcement after providing the data. If I could, though, I think it's so important, if you could allow me to just address some myths about IRS and guns. First, the vast majority of IRS employees are unarmed and will never be armed. Most IRS employees are customer service reps. I like to say they're armed only with headsets, phone headsets, and most of our accountants all of our accountants armed only with calculators.
And 50% of them are home doing it instead of in their offices, but that's a different issue.
Second, the only people in the IRS that would ever be armed are federal law enforcement officials who investigate crimes in the context of very dangerous scenarios, organized crimes, criminals operating on the dark web, narcotics trafficking, human trafficking, terror financing, money laundering. The idea of sending these law enforcement officials to go execute a search warrant or an arrest warrant without being armed along with their other law enforcement colleagues is not something that would ever be a smart or prudent thing to do. Third, and this is about our inventory, I think it's important context, the actual discharge of any weapon by an IRS law enforcement official is extremely rare. But under federal regulations, we are required to maintain a minimum amount of ammunition for training purposes in order for them to be able to hold a firearm when they're executing a search warrant on a dangerous criminal. And so when you see the ammunition numbers in that public site, don't assume that that is ammunition that is used by the IRS ever. It's really just for training.
I got 5 seconds left.
Yep.
I appreciate all that. I'll look at that link.
Please.
If it's in there, then I may have missed it.
Yep.
If it's not in there,
I will get you the data.
you'll get me the specifics so we can
Absolutely.
share with the American
Yep.
people so we can, okay. That's good. That's all I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you.
Do you share my concern about the shocking rise of anti-Semitism on college campuses, particularly, and across our society?
Well, first, thank you for this question. It is a tough question and a tough issue. And I do share concerns. I find calls for hate. I find anti-Semitism. I find Islamophobia abhorrent, reprehensible, heartbreaking.
What I really want to know is how the IRS is deciding what to spend the money on, and why has only 4.5% of the funds been spent, yet the IRS keeps asking for more money.
Yeah, I'm glad. First of all, here's an update. We're at $4.7 billion in spent to date. We are spending it, in particular, early on taxpayer service, hiring more phone assisters, hiring more live assisters in our walk-in centers. We are updating our technology in our call center, adding more voice bots and automated solutions to our call center. We are purchasing more modern scanning equipment, so we're moving paperless. I mentioned we are simplifying all of our notices, and we're doing outreach to taxpayers and underserved populations.
And so, Commissioner, that's all covered in that 4.5% or the
4.5 billion?
4.7?
Yes. I mean, and there's other things going on, in particular, and I spent a fair amount of time in this hearing, investing in our infrastructure.
But are you planning on expending those IRA funds on that? Because you keep asking for money, but yet only 4.7 is what I believe you said.
Here's the issue and why we're asking for money. I mentioned it earlier, but it's really important if you'd allow. Our base budget, there's two parts of the IRS budget. We have a base budget to run our day-to-day train schedule, as I like to say, and then the IRA money, which is all about modernization, closing gaps, improving taxpayer services. That base budget is underfunding the cost that it is to run the nation's tax system on a day-to-day basis. But we have to keep the lights on. So we borrow from the modernization fund in order to pay. And when we borrow from the modernization fund to keep our lights on, it means we're not modernizing. We're keeping the lights on, but we're not modernizing. So when I'm asking for more money, what I'm asking for the IRS is fund our base budget. Help us keep the lights on so that we can use those modernization funds to build the tools that taxpayers want. They want a call center that has a callback option. They want a call center that has more voice bot technology so they can get to things done more quickly. They want web functionality that works like their favorite online bank account so that they can do all their transactions with us without having to call.
What is the status of the IRS's ERTC moratorium? How many claims are in the pipeline? And do you have a timeline for those claims filed before the moratorium?
Yes. So first of all, I appreciate you raising it. It's important that we understand where there's a constituent or a taxpayer, in particular where there's a potential hardship, they're waiting on an eligible claim, and they're facing an emerging hardship. That's why we work with our taxpayer advocate to try to bump up to the front of the line those that are in more of a crisis situation. And we've had some success with that. I think there's been some reference to that here. Plus, I want to learn more about these types of situations because other taxpayers may be experiencing, and maybe there's some scaled solutions we can do.
While I know that the IRS would ideally be given full legal authority to regulate all preparers, would you support a compromise that mandated minimum competency standards targeted at those with no credentials at all?
Yeah, I don't have the authority sitting up here to support a particular legislative provision. I have to get with my Treasury colleagues to do that. As a general principle, we lack authorities today to hold preparers accountable.
The report from 2023 found that no change audits were 13% of audits for those making between $100,000 to $200,000. 25% of those making between $1 million to $5 million resulted no changes. And then 50% of audits making over $10 million result no change. And then you just mentioned one of the question that one of your first priority is like you're going after millions and billions, making wealthy individuals, and your specific mention that about 1,600 people. I just want to know that you are targeting those people, or they've been assessed but they are not paying taxes?
They have been assessed a balance due that is now delinquent.
So those are
millionaires and billionaires that have a delinquent tax debt. Yeah.
So those are not including those no result, no changes, when after they did the audit, but
these are individuals that do have a balance due. It might not have been after an audit, but there's a balance due that's now late, and they're not paying unless we go and enforce that they must pay.
Chairman Smith and the Oversight Subcommittee Chairman Schweikert wrote a letter on July 25th, 2023, requesting a copy of the decision memorandum detailing the recommendation to destroy 30 million unprocessed paper-filled informational returns in March of 2021. The destruction of these returns raises the question of whether information reporting should be scaled back to reduce the burden placed on taxpayers in reporting information that the IRS does not even use. We still haven't received a response from you, and the original response was requested by August 8th, 2023. That's 192 days overdue. So, Mr. Werfel, will the IRS ever provide this documentation voluntarily, or should we consider other means to obtain it?
Oh, I apologize. Look, it's very important that we're responsive to all congressional requests for documents or information from this committee.
So it's been 192 days. Yeah. Tell me, will we be seeing that forthcoming, or do we have to issue a subpoena?
I will go back and make sure that it's forthcoming.
So that's a yes. Do you have a date in which we can expect to have a response?
I will get back to you with a firm date.
How is it possible that the IRS did not know the quantity of sensitive data systems under its purview?
Yeah, that was the situation in 2017 when this unfortunate incident occurred. That is no longer the case.
So what steps have been made to rectify that?
We have invested significant time, energy, and resources in dramatically changing our data security profile. We've hardened basically our security posture, including introducing and implementing all the necessary audit trails so that if this type of activity happened today, the risk of it succeeding is much, much, much lower. The probability of it succeeding is much, much lower.
Can you discuss how you're using more AI for assistance in enforcement, and what does that look forward? How can we look forward to using that when we get to a cloud system?
I'll start by saying we're being very careful with our deployment of AI, making sure that we're following the right ethics and ensuring that, as was mentioned earlier in this hearing, that no bias would be introduced. So we're doing it very methodically. Here's a couple of the key places where we're introducing AI. First, in our call center, so that we are kind of using for example, chat bots, so that when you're asking a question, before you get to a live assister, they're using language recognition to answer your question. And then you resolve the question, and then they're done, and they're done more quickly. So that's one example. Also, in going back to this point of making sure that we're selecting the right cases for audit, there's very sophisticated modeling that uses advanced math, advanced data science, that means that we're more likely to pull a case where there's evasion versus not. That means the honest taxpayer doesn't get burdened, and that means the dishonest taxpayer gets accountability.
I'm concerned about the level of attention the IRS has placed on programs like the direct e-file program, which was not authorized by Congress. Could you share some thoughts on that?
Yeah, in terms of, we want to have big impact for taxpayers that benefit them. And so, I start with the call center. This is a place where there has been historic attention. I think a lot of taxpayers end up coming to the call center hoping for a smooth and better experience. I think the call center certainly faltered in the 2022 tax season, and the changes we can make is not just about hiring additional phone assisters, it's about modernizing our call center. Because you look at call centers in other industries and around, and in other public sector organizations, there are both AI and technology solutions that can make the whole operation operate more smoothly. And then I go to our web tools.
And then another aspect of making the child tax credit effective is ensuring that taxpayers claiming the credit are treated equitably. Last year, I wrote a letter requesting the IRS to further analyze and report existing data by race and gender to help us better understand how other historically marginalized communities may be impacted by racial disparities in audit selection. I appreciate your leadership announcing that the IRS is taking meaningful steps to address these disparities, especially for refundable credits like the EITC and the CTC. Commissioner, can you please update us on this work, including any information about the case selection practices driving these disparities and steps being taken to address the disparities I just mentioned?
Yes, the big takeaways you should have are the following. One, we are significantly reducing the number of EITC audits because audit volume was identified in the independent report as being one of the main drivers of disparate impact. Second, we have changed the case selection algorithm with an intent specifically to reduce the disparities that were existing in our case selection. We'll be able to report in the fall of '24 timeframe whether the changes that we made are having the intended impact of eliminating the disparity. Furthermore, we now want to work to make sure that we are constantly evaluating disparate impact in IRS operations, and we're working on the best way to do that. And in particular, it's often important to work with external stakeholders. This whole issue surfaced by an independent report. So partnering with various stakeholders who can evaluate the impact of IRS operations along with us is critical. So strengthening those partnerships is another part of the plan.
Thank you, Commissioner. When Chairman Neal established the racial economic equity working group when we were in the majority, it's an issue that we feel is important because if Americans feel like the tax system is fair, they're more likely to comply.
I believe we have 14 current cases with the IRS totaling over $1 million in stolen returns where criminals have removed and replaced the name and the address on the check. And theft is made easy by the envelopes that the Department of Treasury uses, making it blatantly obvious that there's a check inside. The issue worsens when the IRS does not allow those individuals to then opt for a direct deposit, so a new check gets issued, and we are in this kind of endless cycle, with one of my constituents having a check needed to be replaced 3 times. It is also my understanding that the IRS does not allow direct deposits for amounts over $20,000 or $25,000. So I understand that these thefts are not solely confined to IRS checks, but every check issued by the Department of Treasury. So I just had a few questions on how we can possibly work together to rectify this issue, and what is the theft and check, first, do you know the cost of what this is costing the United States taxpayers, the fact that these checks are being stolen?
I don't have a metric on that. I do think you have identified the right set of people to come together. Me, the head of the Bureau of Fiscal Service at Treasury that operates our payment platforms, either sends the checks or executes the direct deposit. And I do have a lot of motivation around these open cases. I mean, I've referenced it a few times. The Taxpayer Bill of Rights affords the taxpayer quick resolution. And if they're waiting and having to receive a check 3 times, then we're not meeting that responsibility.
On the issue of tackling the theft itself, are you working with the U.S. Postal Service to try to address this issue?
I'm not aware that we are, but I want to get back to you on that.
It's my understanding that there's a much shorter window for compliance than traditional finance brokers. And to comply when they were implementing this rule, for the traditional being 5 years, the digital asset exchanges only got 16 months. Is there any reason for that?
I don't, at my fingertips, have the full explanation and basis for it, but we will give you the underlying basis for that.
With that, the committee stands adjourned.